Hello and welcome to Seminar 1, which is how to manage your time. So this is a 2-hour lecture condensed into 10 minutes, so let's go. So the first thing is, I don't think you can manage time. We all have 24 hours. None of us can change that in a day. So what I prefer to call it, or I think it's a more useful way of thinking about it, is prioritising. And prioritising comes from the Latin. If you look at the first part of the word prior, which as you probably know means before. So prioritising is about deciding beforehand what it is that you want to achieve. What's the goal here? What's really important to me to do in my day, in my week, in my life? What is it that I really want to achieve, and then what are the activities that I need to spend my time on in order to do that. So I think it's easier or more useful to think of it as prioritising my time. So how can you do that? Well, let's look at an example, someone heroic like Serena Williams. So Serena Williams is going to decide what's important to me. Just like all of us, we're going to decide what's important to us. And she might say, next year I want to win Wimbledon. This is the important goal that I'm going to work towards. And so how am I going to achieve that goal? What do I need to spend my time on in order to do that? So she needs to decide a year before, 10 years before. Maybe, often tennis players and elite athletes, they decide when they're 8 years old what they want to achieve. And then they have to work really hard for years in order to get there. So you need to make your decision beforehand. What's important to me? And then let's look at your activities. How are you going to spend your time in order to achieve that goal? So one way of doing that is, this is quite a famous quadrant for looking at your activities and categorising your activities in order to help you achieve your goals. So you would look at what you do in the day and you would put it into these different quadrants. And if you're someone like an elite athlete, you're going to say, I have to practice for 7, 8, 9, 10 hours every day for the next year or 2 years in order to be at the top of my game and win international competitions. In our case, it might be something like get a particular job or get a promotion or get a place at a particular university. So whatever it is, you're going to decide what is this thing I want to do, and then what activities do I need to do to achieve that. So any of those activities, things like reading books, doing research, practicing your tennis, practicing a musical instrument, any of these things are going to go in the yellow box. And the reason for that is because they're important. You've decided getting into that university is important to me. Winning Wimbledon is important to me, and so we're already in the top 2 squares. The second question we ask ourselves is it urgent? Do I have to do it right now? Do I have to read that book right now? Do I have to go out onto the tennis court even though it's raining right now? And the answer is no, you don't have to. So it's not urgent. So the things that are going to help you achieve goals in the future, usually they're not urgent now. And that's why they go in this yellow box, and that's why we often say, I'll do it later. So a lot of the things that we know are important, we know they're going to help us, we often say, I'll do that later. So me, I want to write a book, and I always find myself going, yeah, I'll do that later though. I'll sit down and start writing later, because I've got other things that I can kind of distract myself with. So anything that you find yourself going, I know it's important, but I'll do it later, is usually in that yellow box. And it's also where people who are really successful tend to spend a lot of their time on yellow box activities. So the other activities are things like they're important and they're urgent. You have to do them now. So if your baby is crying, you can't say, I'll deal with that later. If a baby is crying now, you kind of have to deal with it now. If there's a fire, you're not going to say, I'll do that later. You're going to try and put the fire out right now. So a lot of those activities you just have to do. you can maybe anticipate that you're going to have them, but you usually have to do them right now. The other two types of activity are not important. So things like having your email open all day, you're going to be interrupted by it. There are going to be emails coming through from, Groupon or or eBay or some offer trying to make you buy stuff. So it's not really important, but they'll say things like "don't miss out," and it feels like you have to do it now. So this is very clever marketing, and marketers know how your brain works, that you want to check these things because they feel a bit satisfying at the time, even though they're really not that important. They make it feel like it's urgent, even though it's not. So that's in quadrant 3, and then in quadrant 4 is things that aren't important and they're not urgent. So you don't have to check Instagram. Nothing bad is going to happen if you don't check Instagram for the next 3 hours. Nothing bad is going to happen if, sorry about the siren, I live next to a main road. So yeah, things like, for me, Candy Crush. I had Candy Crush on my phone for a year, and I would literally spend 2 or 3 hours on it. I had to take it off my phone to stop me from doing that because it wasn't urgent, I didn't have to do it, and it wasn't important, but I spent so much time in quadrant 4. So we look at our activities, we decide how much of our time are we spending in quadrant 4, how much of our time is spent in quadrant 3, 1, 2, and so on. A lot of us spend all of our time in 1, 3, and 4 and hardly any time in 2. And that's why in a year we might feel like we haven't made much progress towards our goals. So this is a really helpful way of looking at our time. It's called the Eisenhower method. So just looking at your activities and putting them into those different quadrants, and then deciding, right, how much of my time can I take away from quadrant 4? So in my case, it was taking Candy Crush off of my phone. By taking that off my phone, I suddenly had 2 extra hours in the day. I'm pretending it was 2, it was 3 or 4 actually. but yeah, by doing that, I free up 2 or 3 hours, and that means now I can hopefully reallocate that time to writing my book. So questions that you should ask yourself when you have new methods of doing things. Things like, would this help you decide how to spend your time? So you try it and you decide, does this help me? How can you find out about other time management methods? So you might find this method interesting, but maybe it doesn't really work for you. So what other methods could you use? Ask yourself questions like, do to-do lists work? So if you write down a list every day of all the things you have to do, I find them really satisfying doing the tick next to things to do, but I also very, very rarely do this. I don't find it particularly helpful in the sense that I can't do it. I do not spend time the day before deciding what I'm going to do the next day and ticking it all off. I admire people who can, but I can't do that. So you might decide, actually, to-do lists work really, really well for me. I'm going to try that. What's the Pomodoro technique? So look it up. There are other techniques that you can use. What's the Pareto principle? So look up lots of different ways to do things. You don't have to just accept one way. Look at all of them, try them all out and see which bits of them work for you, which don't. Do some reading around this. People, don't try and come up with this stuff yourself. People have studied this for years and years and years. So see what they have to say. So some interesting reading. I thoroughly recommend The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. This is I think it's about 50 years old, this book, but it's a classic, and the reason that it's still popular so many years later is because the principles are they're classic principles. They don't really change over time. So it's a bit of a chunky book. It takes a while to read, so maybe read bits of it. And take what you can from it. I do recommend reading the whole thing. I find it really inspiring and motivating. If you have less time, Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. It says at the beginning, if you just read the first couple of pages, it will explain why it's called Eat That Frog. Again, this is about how to prioritise so that you can really get things done. After reading both of these books, things changed for me. I was able to make some really big changes in my career just after reading these two books. And another one which is not really about time management, but I think you'll find it useful for achieving your goals, is called Atomic Habits, and it's by James Clear. So so read some of these, look them up, see what all of these people are saying, all of the different ideas that they have, and decide for yourself how to spend your time. So, well done. I hope that was useful, and I will see you next time.